He flew across the country to help his sister and she called it slavery. Then she attacked his wife in marriage. Her 4-year-old accused her sister-in-law of punching her. And the mom believed it. That is where this story begins, and honestly, that single moment tells you everything you need to know about what this family visit actually was. Picture flying across the country, leaving your own life behind, carrying the weight of a stressful job and a heartbreaking fertility journey, and showing up at your sister's door ready to give everything you have. And somehow, it still is not enough. Our narrator is a guy who agreed, reluctantly, to spend 3 full weeks at his sister's house to help her after she gave birth to her second child. He works from home. His wife does not work. They seemed like the perfect candidates to step in and offer real, meaningful support. Think about what that decision actually cost them. 3 weeks is not a weekend trip. 3 weeks means pausing whatever healing they were doing around their own fertility struggles, disrupting whatever careful rhythm they had built at home, packing bags and buying plane tickets and mentally preparing to be in service to someone else for an entire month. That is a significant sacrifice made out of genuine love. But there is a version of helping someone that looks like generosity from the outside and feels like a trap from the inside. And this man walked straight into it. Before we even get to what happened inside that house, let us talk about the setup, because the warning signs were already flashing. Even before he and his wife arrived, his sister was texting him complaints about the previous helpers. Her own mother-in-law and their parents had come before them, and apparently those people also failed to meet her standards. She told her brother they were not getting any rest because they had to pick up the slack on chores. Sit with that for a moment. These were family members who had already flown in, already rearranged their lives, already tried, and they were being described as a burden rather than a gift. This is not a woman who is struggling and reaching out for connection. This is a woman who has a very specific idea of what service from other people should look like, and she is already disappointed before the people she invited have even landed. Then there was the airport situation. The sister covered the plane tickets, which sounds generous until you realize she did not offer to pick them up. $50 for an Uber. Fine, not the end of the world, but it does set a tone. You are a guest in someone else's home, which means you are already in a position where you are dependent on their goodwill. And the first message that goodwill sends is that you are on your own getting there. Imagine landing after a long flight, luggage in hand, already tired, already a little anxious about what the next 3 weeks will look like, and having to pull out your phone and book a ride because the person you came to help did not think to arrange anything. That detail matters because it starts to paint a picture of what kind of help this sister actually wanted. She did not want partners. She wanted staff. The grocery situation is where things get genuinely bizarre. The sister told them to buy their own food because her meals were specially prepared to support breast milk production and she did not want them eating it. Reasonable enough on its face. But when they started cooking for themselves, she got annoyed. And why was she annoyed? Because apparently the expectation was that before they did anything for themselves, they were supposed to ask her if she and her husband needed anything first. They did not receive this memo. They had no way of receiving this memo because it was never communicated. It was just assumed. And when real life did not match the movie playing in her head, she chose to be frustrated rather than just say the thing out loud. So they are standing in a kitchen, trying to take care of their own basic needs, and somehow that simple act of making themselves a meal without checking in first becomes a failure. An offense. A sign that they just do not get it. I am sorry, but who operates like this? You invite people into your home, give them 0 instructions, and then get upset when they do not read your mind? The chores were the same story. Every single day, these two cleaned the house, kept it tidy, made sure everything was in order by the end of the night. They were not slacking. They were not sneaking off to watch television while dishes piled up in the sink. They were actively, consistently, visibly working to keep that home running. And his sister was still not pleased. Not because the chores were not done, but because they were not done exactly the way she wanted them done, down to the last detail. The dishes had to be stacked a certain way. The surfaces had to be wiped in a certain order. The laundry had to be folded with a precision that apparently neither of them could instinctively guess without being told. So meticulous were her preferences that our narrator literally had nightmares about it. Not metaphorical nightmares. Actual sleep-disrupting, middle-of-the-night anxiety dreams about whether he folded something correctly or cleaned something in the wrong order. Picture lying in a dark room, exhausted from a full day of physical and emotional labor, and your brain will not let you rest because it is too busy rehearsing tomorrow's chores and wondering where you will fail next. That is not someone receiving help. That is someone exercising control over people who have given up their own lives to be there. Then there is the 4-year-old. And this is where you have to take a breath, because this part of the story requires a certain kind of patience to process. The child was going through a totally understandable regression. A new baby in the house, all the attention shifting, her whole world turned upside down. She is 4 years old and her universe has been reorganized without her consent. That is real and it deserves compassion. But compassion for a child does not mean letting that child physically assault the adults around her without any kind of redirection. When she started hitting adults and saying mean things, the response from her parents was to tell the helpers not to reprimand her. Do not correct her. Do not redirect her. Just absorb it. 2 adults, guests in this home, doing everything asked of them, and they cannot even protect themselves from being physically hit by a preschooler without getting a lecture about parenting philosophy. There is something deeply uncomfortable about being told to stand there and take it. And then the accusation. The little girl told her mother that the wife had punched her. Punched her. This is a 4-year-old who was upset, acting out, clearly looking for a way to push someone away, and she landed on one of the most serious allegations a child can make in that kind of situation. You have to wonder what the wife felt in that moment, hearing that a child had told her own sister something so extreme, something so utterly untrue. The shock of it. The humiliation. The helplessness of knowing you are standing there trying to defend your character against a claim made by a preschooler. And rather than pause, rather than think about this even for 1 second with any kind of adult reasoning, the sister confronted them about it. She brought the accusation to them as if it had credibility. As if a distressed 4-year-old's claim that a grown woman hauled off and punched her needed to be treated as a legitimate grievance requiring investigation. I genuinely cannot get past this part. A punch. She told her mom her aunt punched her. After 2 weeks of this, the sister actually said to her brother that it was okay if they wanted to leave early because their presence was creating more stress than relief. That sentence deserves to be read slowly, and then read one more time, because it is truly extraordinary. The people who flew across the country, paid for their own transportation, bought their own food, cleaned the house every single day, entertained a difficult 4-year-old, absorbed an assault accusation without losing their minds, those people were creating stress. Not the impossible standards. Not the lack of communication. Not the unspoken rules. Not the assumption that free help should also be telepathic help. Them. So he left. He made the decision that any sane person would eventually make and took his wife home a week early. And that should have been the end of it. 2 adults, exhausted and emotionally depleted, going home to recover. He probably spent that entire ride to the airport feeling some combination of relief and grief. Relief because it was finally over. Grief because this was his sister, and somewhere under all of it was the relationship he thought they had, or the one he wished they had. But of course, it was not the end. Because people who operate the way his sister operates do not let things end quietly. The text started immediately. Not apologies. Not thank yous for the 2 weeks they did give. Instead, his sister decided that this was the moment to share her opinions about his marriage. She told him his wife was not good enough for him. She told him there was something wrong with his wife because a 4-year-old did not like her. She presented a child's emotional meltdown as psychological evidence of an adult woman's fundamental flaws. And she packaged all of this as concern. As if she was doing him a favor by tearing down his partner. As if the most loving thing she could do in this moment was attack the person he had chosen to build his life with. He responded. He told her his thoughts about her expectations and made clear that her opinions about his marriage were not welcome. Her response was to tell him he always twists everything and acts like the victim. That is a classic move. When someone points out your behavior clearly and directly, you reframe their clarity as manipulation. Suddenly they are not describing what happened. They are twisting it. Suddenly they are not hurt. They are performing victimhood. It is a way of making sure the conversation can never actually go anywhere, because any pushback just becomes more evidence of the other person's instability. Then came the update. The message that was so bad he had to ask his wife to read it first and tell him how bad it was before he could bring himself to look at it. Think about what that means. He needed a buffer. He needed someone to absorb the first wave of it and come back to him with a damage report before he could face it himself. His sister unleashed everything. She called him toxic. She said his life was full of drama. She attacked his character in ways that went far beyond the visit, pulling in years of history and weaponizing his hardships against him. She mentioned that she had always been there for him through everything, which is interesting because he specifically notes that he keeps most of his struggles private because he fears being a burden to her. Which means she is claiming credit for support she gave during moments he carefully curated and filtered before sharing, not the real, unguarded, messy version of his life that he did not trust her with. And given everything we just watched, can you really blame him for not trusting her with it? She also said he was never there for her, despite the fact that he came after her first child, came after her second child, lent an ear every time she was stressed, and had just spent 2 weeks being worked to the bone in her home. There is something almost stunning about that claim. He is standing in the wreckage of a visit he did not want to take, reading a message that attacks everything about him, and the accusation being hurled at him is absence. As if all those trips and phone calls and quiet acts of support simply do not count because they did not arrive in the precise emotional packaging she required. The definition of never there seems to be doing things but not doing them exactly the way she imagined, which by that standard no one could ever be there for her, ever, no matter what they did. Let me be very clear about something here, because this verdict needs to be said with no softening at all. This man is not the problem. He showed up when his sister needed him, under circumstances that were already hard for him personally, and he was treated like an employee who had failed a performance review. His wife was accused of assault by a child and that accusation was taken seriously. His marriage was attacked. His character was dismantled in a text message. And through all of it, his sin was leaving 1 week early after being told by his own sister that their presence was causing more stress than relief. The sister wanted a specific fantasy of what having helpers would look like, and when 2 real human beings with their own needs and limits showed up instead of that fantasy, she was furious. The fantasy version of this visit probably had helpers who anticipated her every need before she voiced it, who performed every chore to her exact unspoken standard, who absorbed every difficulty with a smile and never once needed anything in return. Real people cannot be that. Real people get tired. Real people feel hurt when they are accused of things they did not do. Real people have an internal limit on how much they can absorb before the cost of staying becomes higher than the cost of leaving. She is someone who will always find a reason to be let down, always find a reason to be the wronged party, always find a way to reframe the people around her as insufficient. That is not a sister having a hard time after giving birth. That is a pattern. Going no contact was the right call. Not a dramatic reaction. Not an overreaction. The right call. Because the alternative is staying in a relationship where his value is measured entirely by how perfectly he can execute her invisible instructions, and where any deviation is treated as personal betrayal. No one should live like that, especially not someone who already showed up and tried. She drove from North Carolina to Florida to give birth alone, and her husband had no idea until 2 weeks later. She sat in a hospital in Florida, hours away from the state where her husband was living his normal life, and she gave birth to their son surrounded by her mother and her sisters. He did not know. He did not find out for 2 weeks. And when she finally told him, his first instinct was to threaten to sue her. Let that land for a second. Sue her. For giving birth. This story starts the way so many of these stories do, with a pregnancy announcement and a promise between two people that quickly turns into a window into exactly who the people around them really are. She was 23, he was 25, they had been married for 2 years, and they were expecting their first child. She had one simple request. She wanted to keep the pregnancy private until the 3-month mark. Her reasoning was not selfish or strange. Her own mother had miscarried 5 times between pregnancies, and she had grown up watching that grief move through her household like a quiet and permanent fog. She had seen what it looked like when a family celebrated too early and then had to grieve publicly, with everyone watching, with no privacy to fall apart. She carried the memory of that pain with her into her own pregnancy, and she wanted a buffer. She did not want to announce a pregnancy that might not survive. She did not want her family to feel what her mother had felt if the worst happened. That is not controlling behavior. That is someone trying to protect the people she loves from pain. Her husband agreed. He called it their cool little secret. He said it warmly, the kind of thing that sounds like intimacy, like two people holding something tender together. 2 days later, his mother texted her to say she knew it was a girl, and that it was selfish to keep the news of her baby from the family. She was 4 weeks pregnant. She did not even know the sex herself yet. Which means he told his mother within 48 hours, and his mother immediately weaponized the information to attack her. 2 days. He held the secret for exactly 2 days. When she confronted him, his response was to act as if her request had been unreasonable from the start. He was not sheepish about it. He was not apologetic. He shifted posture entirely and decided that the problem was her expectations, not his behavior. He said she could not really expect him to hide this from his mother. He said his mother deserved to know because it was his child too. Now, it is worth sitting with that framing for a moment. She never said the pregnancy was only hers. She never said his mother would not find out. She asked for a few months of privacy during the most vulnerable window of a pregnancy, for reasons she clearly explained, and he agreed. He used the word secret. And then he broke the agreement within 48 hours and acted like she was the one being unfair for noticing. What that tells you is not just that he told his mother. It tells you that in the moment of conflict, he rewrote history rather than take accountability. That is a much more serious thing. Within a week, everyone knew. People were actually annoyed at her for having wanted privacy in the first place. She found herself in the strange and exhausting position of being made to feel guilty for a boundary she had set about her own body and her own pregnancy. This is the part of these stories that always gets me. She did nothing except want to protect her own pregnancy and her family from potential grief. And somehow that made her the villain. But the mother-in-law was just getting started. At 4 months, the couple left to visit her family and the mother-in-law was asked to water the plants. One job. Water the plants. They came home to a fully constructed nursery, painted entirely pink, with a name painted on the wall in careful, deliberate letters. A name the mother-in-law had chosen. Not a name anyone had discussed. Not a name the parents had picked. A name she picked for a baby that was not hers, painted in a room that was not hers, in a house she had been trusted with only to keep the plants alive. The sheer confidence of that decision is something I keep returning to. She did not leave a note asking if this would be okay. She did not float the idea in a text message. She just did it, as if the baby already belonged to her in some way that superseded the parents entirely. And when this woman had a firm conversation about this enormous violation, the mother-in-law cried, and the husband got mad at her for being mean to his mom. Let me make sure I have this right. The mother-in-law entered their home, renovated a room without permission, named their unborn child after herself and her own mother, and the person who got in trouble was the pregnant woman who objected to it. After that it escalated in every direction. Daily articles about the dangers of exercising while pregnant, forwarded without comment, as if the message were obvious. Criticism of every meal, framed as concern but landing as surveillance. Crying because she wanted to breastfeed, because apparently feeding her own child was stealing a bonding moment from the grandmother. Pressure about not wanting visitors in the first month, because her need to recover in peace was being treated as an act of exclusion. And then the delivery room. She said no to having her mother-in-law present. She said clearly and calmly that she only wanted her husband there, that she wanted that moment to be quiet and safe and theirs. The mother-in-law seemed to accept this. But then, while her husband was in the shower, a notification came through on his phone. She opened it thinking it was a message about their lunch plans, something ordinary, something that belonged to the ordinary life she was still trying to hold together. What she found was hundreds of messages. A full detailed plan, between her husband and his mother, for how to get the mother-in-law into the delivery room when she was too exhausted from labor to resist or argue. Hundreds of messages. A plan. Her husband and his mother had looked at the moment she would be at her most physically vulnerable and most in need of trust, and they had made a strategy around it. She cried alone. She did not confront him. She did not scream. She sat with what she had read, and she felt the particular kind of grief that comes from realizing a person you trusted has been working against you quietly and deliberately. And then she made a decision. She told her husband she was going to spend some time with her family and would let him know if anything happened. Then she drove from North Carolina to Florida, hours of road stretching out in front of her, carrying her child and her certainty and her heartbreak all at once. She went into labor. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy with her mother and her sisters in the room, the people who had never once made her feel like a problem to be managed. She did not call him. She waited 2 weeks to tell him what had happened. Now, the 2-week delay is the part of this story that people seem to want to debate. And I understand it. I understand that a father missing the birth of his child is a serious thing, and that under different circumstances this would be a clear and obvious wrong. But we do not evaluate actions in a vacuum. We evaluate them in context. And the context here is that this man made a secret plan with his mother to ambush his wife in the delivery room. He broke her trust about the pregnancy announcement within 2 days. He defended every violation she experienced instead of addressing it. He created a situation where she genuinely could not trust that he would protect her in the most vulnerable moment of her life. She did not run away from him because she did not want him there. She ran because she had proof, documented in hundreds of messages, that having him there was not safe. Was it the ideal outcome? No. Did she make this choice in a vacuum of perfect options? Also no. She made a decision under pressure, with real evidence of betrayal, to protect herself and her child from a plan that had been laid against her. When he found out, he drove down, and his reaction was not remorse. His reaction was not to address any of the things that led to this moment. It was anger and the threat of legal action. He said he and his mother would sue her. His mother. The woman who made the secret plan is now being cited as a co-plaintiff in a lawsuit against the woman who just gave birth to her grandchild. That is the dynamic this child is being born into. Here is where I land on this, and I want to be direct. She is not the villain of this story, not even close. She is a woman who tried to have a private and protected pregnancy, had that taken from her in 2 days, watched her home be invaded and her child named by someone else, found a documented conspiracy to ambush her during labor, and made the only decision available to her that guaranteed her safety. The husband has a right to be hurt that he missed the birth. But he does not get to be hurt without reckoning with why she felt that was the only option. His hurt exists because of his choices. You cannot build a trap and then be shocked when someone goes around it. The mother-in-law in this story is one of the most controlling personalities I have seen in this format. She named a baby that was not hers. She renovated a room in someone else's house without asking. She made a plan to breach a hospital room. She framed breastfeeding as theft. And her son enabled every single step of it while framing every objection as his wife being unreasonable. That is not a difficult mother-in-law situation. That is an enmeshment problem that runs so deep it infected a marriage before the first child was even born. This marriage needs serious work if it is going to survive, and that work starts with him. It starts with him recognizing that the woman he is supposed to protect had to flee across state lines to feel safe during childbirth. That is not a footnote. That is the entire story. She went no contact for 2 weeks and drove to another state to give birth alone because staying felt more dangerous than going. Until he understands what that means and what he contributed to it, there is no version of this that gets better. Drop a comment below telling me which story hit harder for you. And if you made it all the way through both of these, a like and subscribe would genuinely mean a lot.